The house sat at the far end of a dirt road, its paint long flaked away, its windows staring out like clouded eyes. Neighbors had grown used to hearing the old shepherd mix, Brutus, barking late into the night. But one Wednesday morning, his voice carried differently, sharp, frantic, hoarse with a kind of desperation that clung to the air. The sound drew Officer Ellen Merrow from her cruiser. The dog wasn't barking at the door, nor at the empty yard. He was planted stiff beside a bed inside the master bedroom, his hackles raised, his throat raw. And when Ellen finally pushed the bed aside, what she saw beneath it froze her heart in a way she would never forget. The town of Pine Hollow had a stillness that made the air heavy. Nestled between patches of farmland and a sagging pine forest, its roads ended before they ever seemed to begin. Locals like to say Pine Hollow never made the news unless someone died or disappeared. Both had happened enough times to make the joke lose its edge. Ellen Merrow had been with the Hollow County Sheriff's Department for 12 years, long enough to know every leaning porch and every face that kept to its shadows, long enough to recognize that when the wrong dog barked too long, something was broken in the silence. Brutus belonged to George Langley, a widower who hadn't stepped foot outside his home in weeks. George was 74, a man carved out of oak and bourbon. He had outlived his wife, his only daughter, and most of his friends. Ellen had visited him before, once when the power line snapped in an ice storm, another time when his drinking spiraled so bad the mailman reported smelling whiskey through the walls. Both times, he muttered the same excuse. I ain't leaving this place, officer. My whole life's here. When the call came that Brutus had been at it for nearly 16 hours, Ellen figured George must have passed out drunk again. Dogs barked. Old men slept. That was Pine Hollow math. But when she rolled up to the peeling white farmhouse, her gut told her different. The front yard was overgrown, frost crunching across weeds that had long stopped pretending to be a lawn. Brutus's bark stabbed through the air like alarms. He was inside, she realized, pacing. The front door was locked, the curtains drawn. Ellen circled the house, her boots leaving deep prints in the frosted mud. At the back door, the glass was smudged with paw prints. She tapped the butt of her flashlight against the pane. George. No answer. Just the echo of Brutus, louder now, carrying a note of panic that clawed its way into Ellen's chest. She keyed her shoulder radio. Dispatch, this is Merrow. I'm doing a welfare check on Langley out at Old Creek Road, number 17. Dogs distressed. No visual on the owner. Going to breach. The dispatcher hesitated. Copy that. The lock gave way under her boot. Brutus shot toward her, nails scraping hardwood, muzzle flecked with foam. For a moment, Ellen's hand hovered over her sidearm, but the dog didn't lunge. He stopped short, turned and barked at her. Barked, then ran 2 steps toward the bedroom. Stopped, barked again. All right, boy, Ellen murmured, pulling her flashlight free. Show me. The house smelled of mildew and stale smoke. Every surface was cluttered. Bottles on the counter, newspapers stacked like fortresses. Ellen's beam caught Brutus's fur, flashing white and gray as he bounded into the master bedroom. She followed, her hand unconsciously brushing the butt of her pistol. The room was dim, curtains drawn, bedsheets tangled, one lamp knocked over on its side. The dog was planted against the frame, growling low now, no longer at Ellen but at the bed itself. George, she called softly. Silence. Ellen stepped closer, squatting. Her flashlight beam slid under the bed frame. At first, only darkness and dust. Then a pale, bare foot. Her chest tightened. She dropped to her knees and yanked the bed frame sideways with a grunt. Brutus howled as the frame scraped across the floor, revealing George Langley curled stiff against the wall. His eyes stared wide, mouth half open as though his last breath had been stolen from him mid-sentence. But Ellen's pulse didn't spike at the corpse. Death was something she had seen too often. What twisted her stomach was a crimson handprint smeared across the wood floor just inches from George's body. It wasn't his. The size was smaller, feminine, and it dragged, disappearing beneath the loose board at the wall's base. Ellen staggered back, catching herself on the dresser. Christ, George, she whispered. Brutus whined and pressed against George's body, licking the man's gray fingers, then jerking his head back toward Ellen. as if begging her to see what he had seen. She keyed her radio again. Dispatch! I need backup and medical at Langley residence. Confirmed DOA. Possible secondary evidence of foul play. Send unit. The dispatcher crackled back, voice tighter this time. Copy. Who else do you want on scene? Ellen's eyes lingered on the bloody smear leading into the wall. She thought of Detective Caleb Ward, her partner years ago before he transferred out after scandal Ellen never fully believed or dismissed. Caleb had a way of seeing beneath surfaces, of prying secrets loose where others saw none. He was back in Pine Hollow. She'd heard, running a failing private investigations office. She hesitated, then pressed her thumb to the radio. Call Detective Ward. Tell him Ellen Merrow's requesting. By the time Caleb arrived, the sun had slipped behind the trees, leaving the farmhouse in blue shadow. Ellen stood on the porch, arms folded tight against the cold. He stepped out his truck in a dark coat, hair longer than she remembered, face lined deeper. His eyes flicked to hers with something between wariness and unfinished business. Hell of a way to reunite, he said. Inside, Brutus barked once, then fell quiet, curling beside his master's body as if refusing to let strangers touch him. Caleb crouched, studying the scene. No struggle, no sign of forced entry. Just an old man dead under his bed. Why'd you call me, Ellen? She shone her flashlight on the smear. That's why. Caleb leaned in, brushing his glove along the edge of the handprint. He followed it to the loose board, pried it gently with his knife. The wood creaked, lifting just enough to reveal a gap. The smell that seeped out was sweet and rotten. Ellen covered her mouth. God. Caleb's face remained still, but his eyes darkened. There's more here. He stood, snapping the board back into place. We'll need a warrant before we tear up the floor. Tell me what you think it is, Ellen pressed. Caleb glanced at Brutus, then back to her. You already know what I think. Outside, frost was spreading silver across the ground. Pine Hollow's silence wrapped tighter around the farmhouse, as though the town itself didn't want what was under that floor to ever be known. But Brutus knew. The dog wouldn't stop staring at the wall, his body trembling, his growls vibrating like a warning meant only for those brave or foolish enough to listen. And Ellen, against her better judgment, listened. The warrant took 2 days. 2 long, heavy days in which Ellen returned to the Langley house each morning, feeding Brutus, checking the locks, staring at that board with a faint red smear leading beneath it. Every time she left, the silence of the farm clung to her clothes like smoke. On the 3rd morning, Caleb arrived with 2 deputies and a signed order from Judge Penrose. He didn't waste words. Let's open it. The deputies worked the boards up with crowbars. Each snap of old wood echoed like a rifle crack. Brutus whimpered, pacing tight circles. When the first plank came free, the smell thickened, sickly sweet, like spoiled fruit mixed with rust. Ellen steadied her breath. Christ. They widened the gap until the hole stretched nearly 4 feet. A black cavity yawned beneath, the dirt packed unevenly. Ellen flicked her flashlight inside. Bones. Small. Too small. She froze, while crawling up her throat. Caleb knelt, his gloved hand brushing against a cloth scrap half buried in the dirt. He pulled it free, a faded child's dress, yellow once, now the color dried leaves. Behind Ellen, one deputy cursed softly and turned away. More than one, Caleb murmured. His voice carried no shock, just a tired gravity. Look at the spacing. Whoever did this kept digging here. Over time, Ellen gripped the doorway for balance. George. Caleb's eyes flicked up, unreadable. Maybe, maybe not. Word spread faster than fire in Pine Hollow. By sundown, half the town had gathered at the edge of the Langley property, their silhouettes crowding against a flashing red and blue wash of sheriff's cruisers. Ellen hated this part, the gawking, the whispered theories. Pine Hollow had always nursed an appetite for tragedy, like it made the emptiness less dull. She stepped away from the house, letting Caleb handle the evidence team. An older woman broke in the crowd, wrapped in a wool shawl. She moved with purpose, eyes fixed on Ellen. Officer Merrow, the woman rasped. It was Mary Ann Hobbs, the local grocer's widow. I need a word. Ellen forced a polite nod. Now's not the time, Mrs. Hobbs. The woman's eyes burned sharp. It is. You found children in there, didn't you? Ellen stiffened. I can't confirm anything. You don't need to. Everyone knows George Langley's not who he said he was. Folks forget fast, but not all of us. Ellen frowned. What are you implying? Mary Ann leaned closer, her breath sour with tea and cigarettes. Ask about the year 87. Ask about the summer those two girls disappeared off Fairbank Road. We all knew the sheriff bungled it. And George! He kept building that damn chicken coop the same week. Dug half his yard up. But no one listened. Ellen felt a chill crawl up her spine. That was before my time. Mary Ann straightened, her eyes glinting. Doesn't matter. The town remembers. Even if the law pretends not to. Back inside, Ellen found Caleb alone in the kitchen, scribbling notes. The deputies had gone quiet, giving space to the gravity of what lay under the floor. You ever hear about missing kids in 87? She asked. Caleb didn't look up. Fairbank Road. Two sisters, Rachel and June Lattimore, 11 and 9, walked home from a church picnic, never arrived. Search went on for weeks. No bodies. Ellen blinked. You knew that fast. I worked the archives when I was a rookie, Caleb said flatly. Cases like that stick. Her stomach turned. You think George. I think George was a drunk who talked to himself, Caleb cut in. And now he's a dead drunk with kids buried in his floor. That makes him guilty on paper. But you and I both know Pine Hollow paper doesn't always tell the truth. Ellen studied him. There was something behind his voice, an old bitterness, sharp as glass. Say what you mean, she pushed. Caleb finally looked at her, his eyes dark. The last sheriff didn't want Pine Hollow's reputation ruined. So he buried evidence. Buried more than that. Maybe. I tried to push it. You remember what happened to me. Ellen did. Caleb's career hadn't collapsed from incompetence. It had collapsed from crossing the wrong people. She had never asked for the full story. George could have been a scapegoat even in death, Caleb said, voice low. Or he could have been the monster. Right now, the town wanted an answer. The truth doesn't matter to them. That night, Ellen drove home to the black veins of country roads, Brutus in her back seat. She couldn't leave him at the farmhouse. The dog had pressed himself against her when she tried, as though begging not to be abandoned to the smell of rot and memory. At her cabin, she opened the door. Brutus padded inside, circled twice on a rug, and collapsed to a sigh that sounded almost human. Ellen poured herself a glass of bourbon and sat on the edge of her bed, staring out at the dark tree line. In the silence, her father's voice returned, booming, stern, from decades past. You can't save everyone, Ellie. You'll die trying. Some folks deserve the ground they get put in. But the image of the tiny yellow dress wouldn't leave her. Neither would the old widow's words. Ask about 87. 2 days later, Ellen and Caleb met at the Hollow County Archives. The room was dust and silence, shelves bowing under the weight of forgotten tragedies. Caleb slid a file across the table. The Lattimore girls. Photos of two bright-eyed children with crooked teeth and matching dimples. Why wasn't George ever questioned? Ellen asked, flipping through the brittle reports. He was, Caleb said, for about an hour. Sheriff ruled him out. Said he had an alibi. What kind of alibi? Caleb smirked bitterly. One vouched by his drinking buddy. Sheriff Penrose's own cousin. Ellen sat back, the pit in her stomach widening. So they buried it. Caleb nodded. And if the bones under that floor belong to those girls, Penrose's legacy goes up in flames. Which is why I bet every dollar I don't have that some evidence will conveniently disappear before this hits court. Ellen bristled. You think someone's still covering? I don't think, Caleb said, leaning closer. I know. That night, Pine Hollow didn't sleep. Rumors spread, sharpened, turned mean. At the diner, voices hissed about George the killer, about the sheriff who looked the other way. Some whispered darker still, that George hadn't acted alone. Back at Ellen's cabin, Brutus woke her at 2 a.m. with a low growl. He stood rigid at the window, staring into the tree line. Ellen flicked on the porch light. The woods swayed in the wind, shadows bending. But just before the light snapped on, she swore she saw a figure at the edge of the trees, watching. Her pulse quickened. She reached for the shotgun she kept by the door, but when she stepped outside, the yard was empty, only the rustle of pines and the cold breath of night. And now Ellen was holding proof that could tear it all apart. Brutus didn't relax. His body trembled, eyes locked on the forest, as if he remembered something Ellen couldn't see. The next morning, Ellen found Caleb waiting on her porch, coat dusted with frost. He didn't waste time. Medical examiner finished prelim on the bones, he said. They're girls. 2 of them. Age range matches the Lattimore sisters. Ellen's throat tightened. So it's them. Not confirmed until DNA, Caleb said. But it will be. And George, he's a killer. Caleb's jaw worked. Maybe, but answer me this, Ellen. If George killed those girls in '87, why hide them under his own damn floor? Why not bury them in the woods like everyone else does around here? Ellen blinked. You think he didn't? I think somebody wanted us to find them there, Caleb said, voice hard. Somebody wanted George remembered as the monster, even if he wasn't. That afternoon, Ellen returned alone to the farmhouse. She walked through the silent rooms, Brutus at her heel. Dust motes swirled in the weak light. She found herself standing again in the bedroom, staring at the torn-up floor. The hole gaped like a wound, the dirt freshly disturbed from the dig team. Brutus whined, pressing against her leg. "What are you trying to tell me, boy?" she whispered. The dog padded to the wall, pawing at a second loose board higher up, closer to the base of the dresser. Ellen frowned, crouched, and pulled it back. Inside was no bone, no dress. Instead, a stack of old photographs bound with twine. She pulled them out, hands trembling. The first photo showed George Langley younger, bearded, standing in his yard. Beside him, a man Ellen recognized instantly, Sheriff Penrose, both smiling, both holding shovels. Her stomach dropped. She flipped to the next photo. 2 little girls at a picnic, faces circled in red ink, Rachel and June Lattimore. The third photo was worse. It showed the same girls, blurry, frightened, standing inside what looked like George's chicken coop. A figure in the background, half-shadowed, camera tilted. It wasn't George. It was Sheriff Penrose. Ellen's breath hitched. The photograph slipped in her trembling hands. Brutus barked sharply, as if punctuating the revelation. Everything shifted. George wasn't just an old drunk with secrets. He was a man who knew too much, and someone had made sure he never told. The silence of Pine Hollow wasn't natural. It was built, brick by brick, lie by lie. Ellen sat in her cruiser long after dark. The photograph spread across the passenger seat. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The old images glared up at her like ghosts. George Langley was Sheriff Penrose. The circled faces of the Lattimore girls, and that final blurred shot inside the coupe. Brutus sat rigid in the back seat, ears alert, his body angled toward the tree line beyond the gravel drive. Every so often he growled low, as if reminding Ellen of what still lingered out there, watching. Her phone buzzed. "Caleb, you found something, didn't you?" His voice was taut. "I need to see you," Ellen whispered. "Not over the phone." "Where?" Ellen's eyes swept the empty farmhouse, the leaning barn, the black sky pressing down. "Not here." They met in the back booth of Miller's Diner, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and fried onions, where the regulars never looked up from their plates. Ellen slid the bundle of photos across the table. Caleb sifted through them silently, his jaw tightening as he studied the blurred outline of Penrose behind the Lattimore girls. "You were right," Ellen said. "This goes deeper than George. He didn't bury those girls under his floor. He had evidence against Penrose." Caleb's eyes lifted, cold and steady. "And someone made sure he carried that secret to grave." Ellen leaned in. "How do we prove it without ending up the same way?" Caleb's smirk was humorless. "We don't. Not the usual way. Penrose has roots in every courtroom and every squad car in this county. The second this evidence touches official hands, it vanishes. So what's the play?" Caleb studied her, as if weighing how far she was willing to go. "We make it public. All at once. Force the town to see it. Once it's out there, Penrose can't bury it. Ellen's stomach nodded. That's not procedure. Procedure's what let two little girls rot under a drunk's floor for 35 years. Caleb snapped. His voice softened. You want justice, Ellen, or you want paperwork? She sat back, torn between the uniform on her shoulders and the weight of the photographs in her hand. The first shot came 3 nights later. Ellen woke to the crack of glass shattering in her cabin. Brutus exploded into barking, teeth bared, nails skidding across wood. She grabbed her shotgun, heart hammering, and swept the hallway. The window by the kitchen sink was shattered inward. Wind pushed through the hole, but no figure remained outside. On the floor, an empty shell casing. Ellen crouched, breath shallow. It wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Brutus whined, pressing against her leg. His body trembled with a fear that felt contagious. Ellen's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging, or you'll end up under the floor next. She didn't sleep that night. By dawn, she was on Caleb's doorstep, the photograph still clutched in her hand. They know, she said, her voice raw. They came for me. Caleb pulled her inside, locking 3-bolt behind them. His office was dim, stacks of case files piled high. He took the photos, studied the blurred image of Penrose once more. Then we're close, he muttered. Ellen snapped. Close to what? Getting killed? Brutus nearly got torn apart last night trying to protect me. Caleb's gaze softened, just slightly. I won't let that happen. Not to you. The silence that followed was heavy with unsaid history. Ellen looked away first. What if the town doesn't believe us? They'll believe the girls, Caleb said, once they see their faces again. Once they see who circled them in red. The plan formed ugly but simple. Ellen would host a press gathering outside the farmhouse, under the guise of updating the public on the investigation. Caleb would leak the photographs to every reporter within driving distance. The whole thing would hit like a lightning strike, too fast to contain, but as Ellen rehearsed the words she'd need to say, doubt chewed at her. Penrose wasn't just a sheriff. He was Pine Hollow. He baptized children, shook hands at funerals, bought rounds at the bar. To brand him a murderer was to brand the town complicit. The night before the press meet, Ellen sat on her porch, the cold air cutting her lungs. Brutus lay beside her, his head on her boot. She stroked his fur absently, whispering, They'll hate me for this, boy. Maybe they'll hate me more than him. Brutus only sighed, eyes closing, as if to say, hate doesn't matter. Truth does. The crowd that gathered the next day was larger than Ellen expected. Reporters from 2 counties, neighbors with arms folded, even Marianne Hobbs in her shawl, eyes gleaming sharp. Sheriff Penrose himself stood at the edge, hat low, his mouth curved in something between a smile and a warning. Ellen cleared her throat, microphone trembling in her grip. 35 years ago, Rachel and June Lattimore vanished on their way home from a church picnic. For decades, their fate was a question mark in Pine Hollow. Last week, remains were found under the Langley farmhouse. We believe George Langley to be responsible. She paused, forcing her voice to steady. But evidence has surfaced that tells a different story. Gasps rippled as Caleb stepped forward, holding in large prints of photographs. The circled girls, the coupe, the blurred figure of Penrose, unmistakable in his uniform. The crowd erupted in noise, shouts, denials, screams. Penrose pushed through them, his face flushing red. This is a goddamn lie, he bellowed. Fabricated trash from a washed-up detective and a drunkard's mutt. Ellen's pulse hammered. She could feel the tide turning, the crowd splitting down a fault line. Some stared at Penrose with horror, others with blind loyalty. Marianne Hobbs raised her voice, shrill and cutting. I told you he buried them. I told you back then, and you called me mad. Chaos swelled. Deputies flanked Penrose, some hesitating, some gripping their weapons. And then Penrose did something Ellen would never forget. He laughed. Low, bitter, cruel. You think anyone's going to believe a couple of old photographs, he sneered. You think they'll turn on me after all I've given this town? You're the ones they'll string up, traitors to your own blood. The first stone hit him square in the chest. thrown by someone in the crowd. Then another. Shouts turned to roars. The crowd surged. Penrose's smile faltered as he was dragged backward, deputies shielding him from the sudden fury. For the first time, Ellen saw fear in his eyes, but the victory felt hollow, because as the mob raged, as Penrose was driven into a cruiser and sped away under a hail of curses, Ellen realized Pine Hollow wasn't healed. It was breaking open. Later, in the quiet of her cabin, Ellen sat with Caleb at the table. Brutus lay between them, finally at peace, eyes drifting shut. "You know it's not over," Caleb said softly. "Penrose will fight this. He's got friends in high places. We made him bleed, but he's not finished." Ellen nodded. Her hands trembled around her glass. "But the girls," her throat tightened, "they're not forgotten anymore." Caleb's eyes lingered on her. "That's more than most ever get." The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the wood stove. Ellen reached down, running her hand along Brutus's fur. "You saved us, boy," she whispered. "You made us listen." Brutus wagged his tail once, slow, then settled his head back on the rug. Weeks later, Ellen stood alone at the edge of the Lattimore graves, 2 new stones marking Rachel and June's names. The winter wind cut across the cemetery, but the pines stood tall, their whispers softer now. She laid a hand on the granite, her breath clouding. "I'm sorry it took this long." Behind her, Pine Hollow carried on with its fractured silence, half grieving, half denying, all forever changed. And Ellen knew the story wasn't one of victory or even justice. It was a wound ripped open, bleeding truth that the town could never fully wash away. But it was a start. She turned to leave, Brutus padding faithfully at her side. The dog glanced back once at the graves, gave a single bark, and then moved on, pulling Ellen with him into the uncertain light of morning. Quiet resolution. In Pine Hollow, silence had always been a way of survival, but silence could also kill. Brutus had broken it with his bark, Ellen with her courage, Caleb with his stubbornness. And though the town might never thank them, those shadows would linger long after. Something small but powerful had shifted. The dead were no longer hidden, the truth no longer buried. Sometimes that was enough.